Hi. Section 10 of Schopenhauer's Counsels and Maxims is about envy. Let's take a look. Envy is natural to man, and still it is at once a vice and a source of misery. Footnote: envy shows how unhappy people are, and their constant attention to what others do and leave undone, and how much they are bored. Interesting connection here that one of the troubles with envy is that it illustrates unhappiness, it illustrates obsession with or interest in the activities of others, which we maybe could do without if we were self-sufficient, and it shows we're bored. If we were busy and occupied and not bored, we should be less envious, the suggestion is. Back to the text. We should treat it as the enemy of our happiness and stifle it like an evil thought, envy that is. This is the advice given by Seneca. As he well puts it, we shall be pleased with what we have if we avoid the self-torture of comparing our own lot with some other and happier one. Nostra nos sine comparatione delectent, nunquam erit felix quem torquebit felicior. I make that roughly, that says in Latin roughly what Schopenhauer just said. Our own pleases us if we do not compare it with the lot of another. No one is happy to whom the happier person is torture. Okay, back to the text. And again, quum ad spirexis quod te antecedant cogita quod sequantur. If a great many people appear to be better off than yourself, think how many there are in a worse position. The Latin, when you look at how many are ahead, think also of how many are behind. It is a fact that if a real calamity comes upon us, the most effective consolation, though it springs from the same source as envy, is just the thought of greater misfortunes than ours. And the next best is the society of those who are in the same ill luck as we, the partners of our sorrows. So, an interesting observation here, and perhaps indicative of the practical nature of this work, that Schopenhauer says, even though it really amounts to doing somewhat of the same thing, we ought to avoid envying those above us by looking at the people below us, people who might envy us. This will neutralize our tendency to envy. He says that only the second best solution is to think of the solidarity we have with our companions in suffering. It seems interesting to me that he advises us first here to look down and then to look side to side. I might have suspected him to do it the other way around. So back to the text. So much for the envy which we may feel towards others. As regards the envy which we may excite in them, it should always be remembered that no form of hatred is so implacable as the hatred that comes from envy. And therefore we should always carefully refrain from doing anything to rouse it. Nay, as with many another form of vice, it is better altogether to renounce any pleasure there may be in it because of the serious nature of its consequences. So part of the lesson here, I think, as regards envy, we want to avoid at all costs being the object of envy in others. It doesn't give us any practical advice for avoiding it, but indicates that we ought to seek to avoid it in our relations with others. The second half of this section is about aristocracy, and Schopenhauer has some interesting things. The second half of this section is about aristocracy, and Schopenhauer has some interesting things to say about it. Here we go. Aristocracies are of three kinds: 1, of birth and rank; 2, of wealth; and 3, of intellect. The last is really the most distinguished of the three, and its claim to occupy the first position comes to be recognized if it is only allowed time to work. So eminent a king as Frederick the Great admitted it. Les âmes privilégiées rangent à l'égard des souverains, as he said to his chamberlain, when the latter expressed his surprise that Voltaire should have a seat at the table reserved for kings and princes, whilst ministers and generals were relegated to the chamberlain's table. Okay, so the French privileged souls rank equal to sovereigns, the reply of the king, when indicating that an intellectual like Voltaire belongs with royalty, seated at the banquet, while generals and government ministers, men of action, belong at a lower table. They don't deserve as much honor, illustrating Schopenhauer's point here that the hierarchy of intellect will eventually be recognized given enough time. Every one of these aristocracies is surrounded by a host of envious persons. If you belong to one of them, they will be secretly embittered against you, and unless they are restrained by fear, they will always be anxious to let you understand that you are no better than they. Okay. Interesting. Every aristocracy subject to envy. Envy is only restrained by fear. It is by their anxiety to let you know this that they betray how greatly they are conscious that the opposite is the truth. Okay. So the envy connected here with lying and with both self-deception and the sort of enforcement of lies against one's betters, moving in kind of a direction that we picked up by Nietzsche here as well later on. The line of conduct to be pursued if you are exposed to envy is to keep the envious persons at a distance and, as far as possible, avoid all contact with them, so that there may be as a wide gulf fixed between you and them, and if this cannot be done, to bear their attacks with the greatest composure. In the latter case, the very thing that provokes the attack will also neutralize it. This is what appears to be generally done. Okay, so how does one react to envy and the attacks provoked by envy? By continuing to be better than the sniping souls that attack you. The same thing that provokes the attack will also neutralize it by continuing to be above it all, perhaps. The members of one of these aristocracies usually get on very well with those of another, and there is no call for envy between them because their special privileges effect an equipoise. Okay, that's the end of the section. And an interesting note, perhaps going in a direction also that might be picked up by Nietzsche later in his philosophy, that there is a kind of natural sympathy between members of different aristocracies, that they recognize and respect each other as men of quality, whether it's an aristocracy of wealth, of birth and rank, or of intellect, suggesting there's a kind of harmony of the superior that will against the envious and the sniping and the low. So those are Schopenhauer's thoughts on envy and aristocracy from section 10 of his Counsels and Maxims. We'll look at section 11 next. Thanks for watching today. Goodbye.